Welcome to the Ignition Point Podcast.
This is where, from time to time, Jeremiah and I get to share what's on our hearts with all of you.
So thanks for logging in, and we hope you enjoy it. Hey everybody, welcome to the Ignition Point Podcast. I'm Jeremiah.
And I'm Courtney, and we are thrilled to be back recording another podcast for you guys, not only because we get to update you on our most recent trip to Europe, which we promised we would give an update about, but also because this is going to be the first of a 3-part series. The next 3 podcasts are going to be called Dreamer, and they're all going to be about pursuing the dreams and plans of God for our life. But this specific episode is called The Leap, taking those big leaps of faith to pursue the dream of God.
So before we get into that, we want to just kind of bring you guys up to date on what we've been up to in the last month. As Courtney mentioned, we just got back from the trip that we were so excited about into Europe, into Portugal and France. In Portugal, it was my second time to Lisbon, and it was Courtney's first, and I'd say it's safe to say you liked it.
Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. If you've never been, Portugal, specifically Lisbon, is just amazing.
She liked it until she had this pastry called pão de Deus.
Oh my God.
And then she loved it.
Pão de Deus will change your life. It means the bread of God, and it is truly manna from heaven.
So we just had the best time with my friends there in Lisbon. Their church is doing amazing things with the poor in their city, and they're just really sweet people. So we can't wait to go back and visit them again next year. And then we went to France.
Yes, we jumped up to Bordeaux, where our good friend Tina, who we've known forever since I was like 18 years old, she was actually the one who first taught me Portuguese back originally in Brazil, and now she's living in Bordeaux studying, getting her master's degree, and it was kind of twofold purpose there. One, I got to buy myself a couple days to transition languages and get my brain starting to try to think in French again.
The problems that so many of us don't have.
Well, I barely did. And then also we got an opportunity to kind of pick Tina's brain and see, her perspective on the spiritual climate and just the climate in general there. And gosh, Bordeaux is just ridiculously beautiful. It was wonderful.
And then from there, we got on another flight and went to a city in the Brittany region of France. So if you're looking at the map of France, the Brittany region is in the northwest. It's an area that juts out.
Like
and it's
a
kind
nose.
It's like the start of the English Channel. And the city we were going to was named Brest. And this was one of the craziest things I think we've ever done. We went there to visit a pastor couple that we have never met that don't speak English. And then we stayed in their home with them for 2 days.
Yeah.
But we'll tell you more of the story later in the podcast. But it was an amazing time. It just proved again that God sees us and he loves us. And the things that couple had been praying about, we were able to bring some encouragement to them. And it was just really, really special. And hopefully the first of many, many trips back there.
Yeah, it was amazing. So now we're home, and we actually have another local love project here this weekend in Jacksonville, where we use dance and music and drama and visual arts to work with teenagers and children that are in at-risk situations. And then a week from today, we will be on our way with a small team to Uganda to do the same with our Akoa Refuge children that we love so much over there. So we're in go mode here right now once again.
Yep. So next we're going to go to the break. But after that, we're going to talk about what's inspiring us. And having just come from Europe, it's pretty inspiring. So we'll be right back.
Even with what my eyes see, even with what my ears hear, even with what they're saying, the truth in me is not betrayed. The truth in me will rule this day. My heart knows that you are who you say you are. In this day, I choose to believe you are able. It looks like there's no hope, but you've promised me by your grace I'll trust in your sovereignty. Even with what my eyes see, even with what my ears hear, even with what they're saying, the truth in me is not betrayed. The truth in me will rule this day. My heart knows that you are who you say you are. And this day I choose to believe you are able. My heart knows that you are who you say you are. And this day I choose to believe you are able.
Welcome back. So this is the section that we call What's Inspiring Us, where we talk about what's been inspiring us. And since we just got back from Europe, the thing that's been inspiring us and on our minds the most is just the subject of history.
Yeah.
I mean, you cannot walk in the cities that we walked in and in Portugal and in France and not be just awestruck at the history that surrounds us.
It's true.
I mean, I think we walked down streets and entered buildings and even ate at tables that are older than America.
Right.
Which for Americans is tough to fathom because
Yeah.
we think that time began in 1776. But for sure.
But it did not.
Yeah, there's history beyond that. The United States is only 240 years old. And the first thing that we saw was this monument in Lisbon called the Tower of Bethel. And that was constructed over 500 years ago. And that was the place from the city of Lisbon where so many of the most famous explorers
Yeah.
that explored the world, they departed from that exact place.
I was fascinated by it. Maybe because our oldest son studied the explorers at the beginning of this school year. So I was
Yeah.
like, this is where they really were. Like, it was crazy.
It's wild. Then you can walk just down the street to this monastery and you can enter the church area and see the grave
Yeah.
of Vasco da Gama.
It's crazy.
I mean, one of the most famous explorers. And then as you walk through the city of Lisbon, you start to notice how many old bookstores there are.
Yeah.
I remember this from my first time there last year. My friend Rodrigo and I would go into every old bookstore we could find because it's almost impossible to find anywhere else in the world what you can find there. So we went into this
Yeah.
bookstore, and in this bookstore, you could hold books in your hands and leaf through them that are older than our country.
It was crazy. I mean, we picked up this one little magazine
Yeah.
from like 1800 something, and it was like the story of the Catholic missions down the Zambezi River or something in Africa, but it was like right there on the shelf.
Yeah, 1832. That book is almost 200 years old. In America, it would be, behind a wall of glass.
I don't think anything was behind glass there in this. It was like from 15.
Yeah,
or
there were
6.
some, but they were from
Yeah.
like the 1300s.
It was crazy. Unbelievable.
All this stuff just for sale. It really, I could have spent hours in that store. And then from there, we went to Bordeaux.
Yeah.
And I mean,
That city. I mean, I remember one night we're standing there in front of this big like monument in the city, and I'm thinking this thing is just hundreds of years old. And then you walk the city, and it's surrounded by all these gates that are like these arched, beautiful, ornate architecture. And there are these entry points into the city at different places, which actually became kind of a source of humor for us because it can get a little bit confusing. Like even with Tina, who lives there, like one night we were walking and we're like, oh, that's the gate that's closest to our hotel. And
so we walked 20 minutes towards that gate only to realize that, oh no, that was one of the other 8 gates that
Right.
enter the city. We're 40 minutes away from our hotel now.
it was so fun. But the architecture is just unbelievable.
Yeah, and then we went to the city of Brest, and that whole region of France,
Yeah.
as we said earlier, is just kind of awe-inspiring and
Magical.
Yeah, magical. So it's this rugged, jagged coastline dotted with these little fishing villages.
Yeah.
And in the middle of every little town that you drive through, there's a steeple. You know, there's a church in every city, an old church with a steeple. And so many of these cities had been bombed out during World War II. But it's funny, the steeples still remained. So even some of them were like the old steeple of the church and then new construction of the actual facility of the church. This one in particular that had not been touched was this little Catholic, how would you describe it?
Tiny chapel.
Tiny little chapel on this
Stone.
coastline with a stone cross out in front of it. You know, it's a one-room chapel. You walk in and they've done an amazing job refurbishing it. And then you walk down the hill from there and there's another stone cross just stuck in
coast.
to the side of the hill, basically. Yeah. And then it overlooks the Atlantic Ocean. And I know that they get crazy strong storms
Yeah.
that blow into that area. But still, those stone crosses that were planted there centuries ago, they remain.
Yeah.
And what was so inspiring about those crosses and that chapel and the churches in the middle of every village was just what they had seen throughout history.
Yeah.
Whether it be storms that had blown in off the ocean or bombs that had fallen from the sky, they had all endured such hardship, but yet they were still standing strong.
And for me, it was almost this like awe-inspiring thing too for the future.
Yeah.
You know, like this legacy of regardless of what the spiritual climate appears to be in Europe right now, and specifically in France, that there's more to come.
Yep. It's endured crippling defeats, but there's still a remnant clinging to the ground there.
Yeah.
And you could feel it as you walked around. So that's kind of what's been inspiring us. If you have any ability to get near anything that's old,
Do it.
or read something about history, because it provides a context that so many of us take for granted.
Yeah.
So we'll be back after the break with this first part of the Dreamer series called The Leap.
I will stand when the wind blows. I will fight, but only if you know. I won't fear when the storms rage around me. I will stand when the wind blows. I will fight, but only if you know. I won't fear when the storms rage around me. I will stand, I will not fear, and I will believe. I will stand, I will fight, I will believe. My heart knows that you are who you say you are. And this day I choose to believe you are able. My heart knows that you are who you say you are. And this day I choose to believe that you are able.
Well, welcome back to our 3-part series on Dreamer. This one being about taking those big, giant leaps of faith. I love to talk about this. This is like one of my favorite things. So I might get a little excited. I actually teach these like workshops about this, helping people identify and kind of unearth their dreams and then figure out the steps they need to take to chase those dreams. And we're not going to have time in these podcasts to do the identifying and unearthing. If you want that, you'll just have to come to one of my workshops. up sometime. But we want to talk about chasing the dreams. And I have to share with you guys this quote that I love. It's by a woman named Mary Oliver. And I actually saw it walking through the zoo one time. I was walking through the zoo with my kids and I saw this quote and it says, "Tell me what it is you plan to do with your one wild and precious life."
Yeah.
And I was like, yes. Like, I think I really stopped and snapped a picture of it in the zoo because I was like, that's exactly it. Tell me what it is you plan to do with your one wild and precious life. And I can remember years ago when I was a young girl, I'd just come to know the Lord and I read Ecclesiastes 7:2. And that scripture says basically that it's better to go to the house of mourning or the funeral house than to the house of feasting, or one version says the house of dancing. And at the time I was like, bump that. Like, I love the house of dancing, the house of feasting. I'd much rather be breaking it down, Party. But as I grew a little bit, and I had this one specific year, a number of years ago, where many people that I knew and loved were dying, and even friends were dying, and I was speaking at their funerals, things like that. And I wrote an essay in that time called Live Well, and it was just this reflection on exactly that quote. Like, the thing about what Solomon was saying is at the wedding feast, everything is grand, right? Life is beautiful, and you're not questioning how you're using your life. But at the funeral house, when a life is coming to an end and everyone is reflecting on that life, it causes you to ask yourself the difficult questions. What am I doing with this one wild and precious life that I've been given? So our hope is that over these next few podcasts, we can equip you and help you maybe further pursue the dreams that I believe many of which God has placed in your heart. Because I don't want any of us to be 80 years old and looking back with regrets,
Yeah.
But so often we think like, what am I supposed to do with my life? What is the plan of God for my life? And so easy answer, 30,000 foot view answer is, it's the Great Commission. It's Acts chapter 1 and Matthew 28. Go into all the world, making disciples of every nation. Go be a witness of who Jesus is in your neighborhood, in your city, the nations around the world, in your workplace. Jeremiah preaches this amazing message on being the fragrance of Christ to the world. That's your call in life, is to represent Jesus, right? But what that looks like for each and every one of us on an individual level is totally different. And some of us, we have these dreams that are life-changing dreams, right? They are dreams that we pursue for decades of our lives. And some of them are small one-time dreams. Like, I want to go on a trip here, or I want to accomplish this. And so hopefully we can equip you for all of those different types of things. But the one thing I can tell you that I have seen through experience is that so many of the dreams of God are either ignored or aborted. And this is why. They're ignored because I have never once had a moment where it was like the angels opened the heavens and cymbals were clanging and the voice of God
Do this.
rumbled. It just doesn't work like that. So often it's a thought. I can remember for years I ran an arts ministry and school here in Jacksonville. And I was 19 years old when I started it. And it was literally, I was driving home from the gym, sweaty one day, and thought, wouldn't it be cool to use the arts to reach young people? Boom. That was it. And so then in that moment, it could have been the same thought I'm still having today, but instead steps were taken, which we're going to talk about. And for 10 years, thousands of people were impacted by one simple little God dropped thought. And that's really how France started.
Right. So backing it way up, a lot of our first missionary trips were to Europe.
Yeah.
We went to Scotland quite a few times. We went to France. And before that, I was in Russia and Belarus and traveled, to Italy and to Switzerland and Austria and all around. So we had this history in France, but then there was this long period of time where we were other places. We've been to Brazil a ton and we've been to Africa a lot, but for some reason it felt like the door on Europe was closed.
Yeah.
So we felt like the Lord was really putting it on our hearts, and I was really feeling that. So we just began to pray, like, God, hey, open up a door for us in Europe and we'll go. So I started getting some opportunities to go over there and play keyboard for another worship leader, and that was great because I got to feel Europe again.
Yeah.
But still, I knew that the Lord had something for us over there. So we just kept praying, and then I got an invitation through Brazil to this church in Portugal, and it was an immediate yes. Like,
Yeah.
I know that this is the beginning of an answer to prayer. So I went last year, and we talked about that, and then we got the opportunity to go back again this year. But in that year, the Lord was putting something on your heart about France.
Yeah, because like last June, we were in Zambia. Again, these things, God uses wherever you are. So we were in Zambia, and the queen of the Lubalunda tribe had come on base, and she only spoke French.
Right.
And so I was kicking myself because 16 years ago, I could have interpreted for her, but I had lost my language. And so I started getting really convicted about that. I think I even maybe spoke about that in a podcast last year and started trying to rekindle my French understanding. And then in September, I kind of had these couple of divine encounters with the Lord about France. Again, I was in Brazil. I was driving in the car with a friend, and out of nowhere, I felt like the Lord just like put it in my head, like, go to France. I'm sending you to France. Just go. And I was like, what? Just show up? We did that once before on the island of Montserrat, but the island of Montserrat is much smaller than the country of France. So I was like, Lord, we might need a little more direction than that. And then it was just all kinds of France stuff. I walked into my hotel. There's a painting of France. I walk into the conference. This guy's painting the Eiffel Tower right in front of me with dreams written in English over the type of the Eiffel Tower in Brazil. I'm in Brazil, And then I was in prayer for a service I was about to speak at, and I just had this image of a pastor who I feel like was kind of symbolic in France, on his knees, just crying out, God, send help, God, send help. And I was like, okay, Lord, what do you want? And so thus began us kind of trying to discern that. And this is how the dream of God works, right? You have these things, and all of that could have ended there. Like,
right. It could have been simple prayers and simple thoughts that then evaporated as quickly as they came.
yeah. And we don't have any contacts in France anymore. And so we just came home and kept praying, pulled out all our French books, started studying more. And then the invitation came to come back to Portugal this year.
Right.
And Jeremiah and I just looked at each other like, it's on the continent. Like, God said, just go. So we're just going to show up. And then I realized my friend Tina lived in Bordeaux. So we're like, okay, at least that shows us the first plane ticket we can buy.
Right.
Gets us in the country. I'm telling you all these little details because it gives you the idea of you just start taking steps. Like,
Right.
what is that you always say about a boat? Like, the boat has to be moving.
Oh, yeah. It's impossible to turn a ship that's still.
Right.
You can turn the wheel as hard as you want, but if there's no momentum, if there's no movement, then it's impossible to change the course or redirect a ship. It has to be under momentum.
So we just knew we had to get there, So we bought the first flight to Bordeaux, and then we're sitting here in Jeremiah's office, and we're trying to figure out, like, of course it was going to be great to see Tina, but what else, God? Like,
Right.
This was bigger than just a friendship. And so we're sitting there, and I was like, let's just pray, because we're looking at cities and flights and all kinds of stuff. And so I'm like, let's just pray. So we stop and we start to pray, and my cell phone rings, and
In
it's
that moment.
right, literally in that moment. And it's this girl that we had been trying to get in touch with that we had known from France back in 99, I think it was. And we had just not been able to connect with one another. And long story short, she was the one who ultimately led us to this older couple in the city of Brest in France that led us on the journey that we talked about a little earlier already in this podcast. That is just the beginning.
Yeah. And he was the pastor that you
Yeah.
saw in your vision. I mean, you didn't see a face, but it had to be that guy. It resonated so strongly inside of us when our friend from France brought that to our attention. We're like, this is the guy. Now we know we have to go. But even still, like, this is crazy.
Right. And if you knew their story and all that they've been through, but then you start to like pursue the dream. So just to kind of break this down for a minute here, and then we'll kind of tell you more about how France went. But, once you recognize that there's a dream in your heart that could be the dream of God, one, you can't ignore it, right? I said dreams are either they die because they're ignored and they're tossed off as just a thought, or they're aborted because then you look at the dream and you say, that's impossible. impossible. These are the 800 million reasons why I cannot, and God's going, I can do it. Don't abort the dream. I can do it. Just start taking steps. And I just want to read you out of 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 24, where Paul writes, do you not know that in a race, all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. It's the same thing the writer of Hebrews is saying in chapter 12, verse 1, like throw off the sin of disbelief, throw off everything that's causing you not to trust God and run the race that he's set before you. Reach out for the thing that he's put in your heart, because it has to do with more than just you. It has to do with more than you just being able to say, look what I accomplished in my life. It has to do with impacting the world and the nations. And maybe that seems lofty because, right, we're talking about countries in this moment. But I can tell you stories from our art school where it's about one kid, but it would be worth it for that one kid, that one coworker, that one person you invite to church, whatever it might be. Yeah. And so I just encourage you, like, no excuses. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, it says that God uses the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. So no matter what you tell me is your excuse, then you fit perfectly within that definition. Right. I mean, money is not an excuse. Like, just find the dream and chase it. But be prepared that as you do that, there will be hindrances.
Oh my God. So let's talk about the hindrances to our Europe trip. For months before we left, Courtney and I both had been just dealing with these crazy physical things.
Crazy.
One sickness after another, and things that we had never dealt with before.
Yeah.
Like crazy respiratory things, itchy rashes that won't go away for months.
It was weird.
Like truly bizarre things that were the plan of the enemy to get us bogged down, to get us distracted, to get us frustrated, and to get us off of our course. And then as we prepared to leave that day for Portugal, it was some freak storm in Atlanta. So that was our connecting city. So it took us 4 hours of delay before we got out of Jacksonville. Yeah. So we missed our flight to Paris, which was our connection to Lisbon. So we get to Atlanta and we sit there for another 8 hours before we are rerouted to Amsterdam, where we waited for 2 hours, before we were rerouted to Brussels, Belgium, where we waited for 2 hours, before we finally made it to Lisbon about 12 hours later than we were supposed to arrive. And without our luggage. Yeah. So the next day, we waited for our luggage, never arrived. Yeah. Had to go to the church service with no guitar, no clean clothes, none of that. Luckily, they had a guitar there for me. But even on the way to church that day, we were pulled over by the police.
For a random reason.
Just a random paperwork check, which everything was fine, but it's just another thing. We get to the church. The service was amazing. And we felt this huge sense of accomplishment because we had stared down all these little petty, distracting circumstances, and we still made it, and it was still great time in the presence of God. The next morning, still no bags, still no guitar. Go back to the church, lead worship. Actually, no, that night my guitar arrived very late at night. So I did have my guitar the next morning, but still the same socks. The same clothes. We get back to the hotel that afternoon. Courtney's luggage had arrived, thank God. She felt bad for me, but if my bag had arrived before hers, there would have been a serious problem. So we go back to the church service that night, the final night of the conference. I'm still wearing the same socks. Oh, goodness. The next morning, the church service there was great. It was a great conclusion to the weekend. And then we got back to the hotel to check out, realized Courtney had left her phone at the hotel that morning.
Oh my gosh.
And then we realized we had been charged for all the phone calls that we were making to the airline to try to find my luggage. That was a nice little surprise. And so we switch hotels for the last night, have a great last night in Lisbon, and then wake up in the morning, still, my bag is not there.
No bag.
I'm freaking out. So I finally get a hold of someone at the airport. They tell me that my bag is going to arrive 30 minutes before we're scheduled to leave for France. Sure enough, the bag arrived. I got it. I said hello to it. I embraced it. And then I took it to the next airline and rechecked it for the next trip. So that was just in the travel and the here and the there and getting everywhere we were going. But the biggest obstacle that we were still going to face was when we arrived to Brest to meet these people that we had never met before, who we'd only been introduced to online. We've never been to that area of France. It had been almost 20 years since we've been to France, which means 20 years since Courtney's spoken in French, since I'd spoken in French. And the people we were staying with in their homes didn't speak any English.
No English.
So what we got to witness over the next day and a half was nothing short of a miracle. Courtney's French came back to the point that we were able to converse with this family for a day and a half, 2 days. Yeah, 2 days.
2 full days.
And understand everything, most of everything that they were trying to tell us, the things that the Lord had been putting on their hearts, their struggles, their victories, their defeats, all this stuff we were able to understand because in that moment where we thought it would be impossible, I mean, we had all these translating apps up on our phone and everything, but the Lord gave Courtney French for those days.
It was crazy. And that's the thing. Like, we did the work. Like, I had been studying my French again nonstop leading up to those days. But Jeremiah and I both knew there was going to be a supernatural element required. Right. And it was shocking for me to watch. It was like I was outside myself listening to myself speak. Like, oh my God, thank you, Jesus.
And I was sitting there like, man, why didn't this happen for me? I studied French in high school and college. I've got nothing.
But that's the beauty, I think, of having the Bible, right? Because we can read, I mean, the stories, we could tell 30,000 stories. Well, that might be an exaggeration, but a lot of stories of the men and the women throughout this book of the Bible that from beginning to end, just they took these leaps of faith, whether they were risking their lives like Esther and David or stepping out in obedience like Peter and so many of the other disciples. Like, we are in good company. We are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. Like, that has to encourage us. We are not alone. And I read this quote the other day by Brother Lawrence, who lived back in the 1600s, where he was talking about how much it blesses God when we just choose to trust him. So I encourage you today, like, whatever it is that is the dream in your heart, like, let me just ask you some of these questions to ask yourself. Like, first of all, write it down. What is it that you feel like God is calling you to do? And how are you going to accomplish it? Start writing out the steps. Like, what's a baby step? What's the little step one I can take toward this dream? Okay, brainstorm that. What's the step after that? Who are you going to do it with? Who's going to partner with you to help you? Because none of us can accomplish these dreams on our own. Who are you going to serve? Who does the dream impact? Is it one person? Is it many people? When? Are you supposed to do this later? Are you supposed to do this now? And let me just tell you, whatever the dream of God is in your heart, unless you hear a resounding no from God saying, do nothing now, do something now.
Yeah, I heard a great quote one time that said, so many people pray for the green light when we've already been given the green light. We should be praying for the red light if we're not supposed to do it. But we know that we are supposed to do it.
Exactly.
So take action.
Take action. And then finally, where, right? Where are you going to accomplish this dream? So those are just some practical questions. You can sit and listen to this again. Start to brainstorm multiple steps in response to those questions. And then go for it. Do not let fear keep you back. Do not let all of your inadequacy keep you back. Do not even let your own lack of understanding keep you back. Find a baby step and leap for your dreams.
So as you digest this month, do what Courtney said. Write down the answers to those questions. Re-listen to this, and then we will talk to you again next month for the second part of the Dreamer series, which will be
waiting.
That's right. What are you supposed to do while you're waiting for the dream of God to be accomplished? See you next month.
Thanks so much for listening, and be sure to keep an eye out for our next podcast.
And stay in touch with us at our website, theignitionpoint.org, or on Twitter, or on Facebook, or on Instagram. See you next time.